Hey everyone, it's August 22, 2013. I'm Rene Ritchie, and today we'll be talking gold iPhones, fingerprint scanners, new versions of Mavericks, and whatever apps and games happen to be going on and are good and true in this universe. This is the iMore Show. Joining me, as always, is the managing editor of iMore and the executive editor of TheLoop.com, and probably 9 or 10 other titles I forgot to bestow on him this morning. Peter Cohen, how are you, Peter?
Good. Thank you, Rene. How are you?
I know you have a Royal Admiralty and at least 3 space fleets, but I forget the details.
Yeah, me and Miles were Costigan.
Also joining me is the senior editor of iMore, and a man I am increasingly convinced is the Stig, Richard Devine.
Hello, how is everybody?
Good, and good morning, chat room. Everyone in the chat room is looking handsome and lovely as usual. Peter, I want to get down to it because you have been trolling the hell out of me on Twitter about this whole gold iPhone thing. And I just want to start at the beginning. So there was reports from an analyst, a financial analyst who, and I never trust financial analysts, although this was perhaps the most trustworthy of financial analysts, and he said that he heard that Apple would be producing a gold iPhone with a sapphire Audi home belly button. And it was so outlandish, I had to ask around. And while I found out that the Audi home button was absolutely not true, at least not so far, the gold iPhone was in fact coming. It was going to be paler than bright gold, more of a champagne-y color, but it was indeed, in the pipeline for iPhone 5S. Then MG Siegler heard the same thing, then Mark Gurman, then John Pachowski at the Wall Street Journal, and all of a sudden it is now a thing. And Peter, this is apparently causing you to want to return all your Mr. T jewelry and disavow gold forever.
That's right. As I said on Twitter yesterday, the gold iPhone looks like it'd appeal to Elvis. Not cool, black leather, 68 comeback Elvis, but fat, sweaty, died on the toilet Elvis. I don't understand. But look, I've never understood mainstream tastes, and apparently gold is enormously popular. Especially overseas. I'm hearing that it's a whole cultural thing in India and China and whatever. I don't care. I still think it looks tacky and stupid. That's just my personal opinion.
So there's a couple things. First of all, the iPhone is a mature product line, and the original iPhone was aluminum with a black plastic piece on the back. Then with the iPhone 3G, it went both black and white. The iPhone 4 famously had a white option, but it was delayed by many, many, many months. And then again with the iPhone 5, we had black and slate and silver and white. And it's going on to be the 7th generation iPhone, and it's not going to look any different outwardly, really, than the iPhone 5. And Apple always has this sort of this worry is ascribed to Apple, where no matter how much better the camera, how much better the processor, whatever else they do internally to the device, people are going to say, bored now. And I think at least, and tell me if I'm wrong, Richard, at least if they do a gold variant, there's another color to distract people with. It looks the same, but if you want something different, you can get the gold variant.
Yeah, it's the quickest way to differentiate, isn't it? It's, like you say, when the white one came out, okay, it was delayed, but it was shiny and new and also in white, and now it'll be shiny and new and also in gold. And as we've previously heard, it's not a difficult color to turn to anodize the back into, so we shouldn't hopefully be seeing the delays, so it shouldn't just become some kind of farcical here it is, but you can't have one just yet sort of thing.
And Peter, I won't use the hipster word, but and you know this from our readers and probably from the readers of The Loop, that there's always a contingent of people who want desperately for people to know they have the latest iPhone. And when it's in an S year and it doesn't look any different, I mean, they were making backs, like sticker backs saying, yes, this is the new iPhone, for God's sake. There is an element of ego involved in this, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And I think that that may go to explain part of the reason why Apple is pushing out a gold iPhone. Certainly somebody spends Well, if they're getting a subsidized version, a couple $100. If they're buying an unsubsidized version, $650. They want to be able to show off their phone and make sure that everybody knows that they've got the latest. And different chassis colors is one way to do it. Quite frankly, though, I still am at a loss to explain why it's so bloody important to people to do this, because you can go out and buy a $12 gold iPhone case from the guy at the mall and have a gold iPhone. We've been seeing, people have been said ever since the gold iPhone news started to erupt. We've been getting readers sending us links to, photos of celebrities holding gold iPhones, going, "Look, it's the gold iPhone." No, it's not. It's somebody who went to the mall.
Aftermarket.
Right, exactly. It's not a big deal. It's just, I'm kind of the Henry Ford approach. You can have any color as long as it's black, and then after the fact, do whatever the hell you want with it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And to Richard's point, Ali Kazmuha, one of our writers, said that gold is not only easy to anodize, it's one of the easiest colors to anodize. Black, not coincidentally, is one of the hardest, which is why we have black and slate and not black on black. But it's also immensely popular, and not just in Asia. In North America, a vast majority of their orders aftermarket were gold. And I can't imagine that was purely Kardashians. I think there were probably a few non-Kardashians involved in that as well. But the other thing that interests me about this is the idea that that the product is maturing to the extent that Apple is comfortable, because it's not easy to produce even a color iPhone. Apple is not making 5 or 6 models here. They're not producing limited runs. They're doing 50 million units, and making a third color for Apple is a massive thing. It's not just a small sampling thing. And I wonder if it's that combination of factors. It's that, yes, it will appeal to Asian markets. There will be some appeal to North American markets as well. It will differentiate it from current generation devices. It will make the iPhone 5 came out. It was different down to the atom from the iPhone 4S, but people said boring the same. So Apple's like, all right, we rebuilt the entire damn thing. You people couldn't care less. You wanted a superficial change. Here's your superficial change. They put it in a Bugs Bunny glove and smack you in the head with it and let you go on about your way. But also, it kind of fits. Well, Richard, it kind of fits the premium jewel high-end watch thing that Apple started with the iPhone 5.
Yeah, we can compare a little bit to BlackBerry. They've just recently launched a gold and white variant of the Q10, I think, in Dubai, and it's a big thing over there. But again, it's got that prestige about it. It's not because necessarily it looks better than the comparable plain white one or the black one. It's all about the high end. Mine's gold. It's special. It's got that. It's got that aura about it that that it isn't just off the shelf. That it's it is a premium piece of equipment. Not sure what that may look like though when there's 10 million of them around North America, but it does have that kind of prestige value to it, and especially with it being a metal construction as well. I can imagine it's going to feel premium, as premium as it looks.
All right, so let's do a brief sounding. I am probably going to get the gold iPhone. I talked about this on Mac Break Weekly with Leo Laporte, and he said he was going to get it too. Partially, I have to cover this stuff, and I already have a black and white iPhone 5, so getting the gold iPhone 5S at least will help me tell it apart at a glance, but also it'll make it more visually interesting when we cover stuff for iMore. On my own, I'd probably get it anyway because, again, it's new, it's shiny, and it's different, and I like to try different things. Peter, I'm guessing the gold iPhone 5S is not on your Christmas list.
Probably not, unless there was some compelling reason under the hood to get the gold model specifically. Like if Apple released the gold as a limited edition that had let's say 128 gigs of storage capacity as opposed to 64. That might be an incentive for me to actually get a gold phone, but just for the purpose of having gold, no way.
You think they would do that? You think they would limit a 128 to a gold model?
It's entirely possible. If you want to differentiate the gold model as a luxe model, do something to make it unique.
$999 gold and 128 gigabytes.
There we go.
Richard, what about you? It's not in British Racing Green. It's not in Imperial Guard Red. It is C3PO Gold.
I think I'll get one. I think I'll
Yeah.
get one. Like you, I have a black one, I have a white one. So it'll be different, and it's new, isn't it? I've got the new one. It's gold. It's something different as well. I mean, yeah, I think every phone I've ever had has been either black or white, so it'd be nice to have something different. I prefer maybe sort of red or green or something like that, but I'll take what I can get.
All right, chat room. While we move on the discussion, please let me know, what are you going? What color are you going for? Are you going to go for gold? Are you going to go for silver? Are you going to stick with black? Shout out what your preference is. Peter, Mavericks. So here's the thing. Every Monday, people are like, iPhone 5 beta incoming, new, and then called it, and people put that up on blog sites. It hasn't been accurate for the last couple weeks. Everyone is still linking to it. I don't understand. But Mavericks previews are kind of just, nonchalantly making their way out there, and they're not subject to the same insanity.
That's right. Well, I don't think that that Apple is quite on the same development track for Mavericks that it is on iOS 7. We all know that there's going to be an event on September 10th where Apple is presumably going to introduce the iPhone 5S and maybe some other stuff. We can infer from that Apple is going to try to push iOS 7 to be GM at about the same time, maybe within a week or so of that announcement. Assuming that that's the case, then Apple is very heavily incented to get iOS 7 as close to done as possible between now and September 10th. They're not under the same pressure for Mavericks. They haven't announced a release date for Mavericks yet. And they seem content to be releasing developer previews of Mavericks as opposed to actual betas. It's sort of like when Apple's engineering staff has the bandwidth to push out a new release of Mavericks, they'll do it. And DP6 came out this week. But they're definitely not on the same kind of get it done schedule as iOS 7. So that's why we're seeing the disparity.
Now, I know you can't violate the NDA, nor do we want you to, but it was fairly obvious at WWDC when the iPhone version of iOS 7 came out and the iPad did not, that the iPad was lagging behind the iPhone in terms of development of iOS 7. Do you get any sense of how far along they are with Mavericks? Did the original seed, the one they showed off, look fairly finished to you, or did it look like there was a ton of work still to do?
Very much a work in progress, absolutely. And, to date, so still very much a work in progress. A lot of features seem very solid, but a lot more under the hood seems to be stuff that still needs to get done.
Now, what's interesting to me, Richard, is that, last year, maybe the last 2 years, Lion and Mountain Lion kind of just came out as their own thing at some point in the summer because, a lot of the Mac stuff had already been announced. I think last year, with the exception of the iMac, a lot of it had already, the MacBook Airs had already been updated, the MacBook Pros had already been updated. This year, we've only seen MacBook Airs. There's been no Haswell MacBook Pros. There's been no Haswell Mac Minis. The new Mac Pro has been teased, but it hasn't been released. It seems like we have this whole Game of Thrones fall is coming thing going on. And it's entirely likely we may not see Mavericks until we see those new Macs.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're kind of all under the assumption that the MacBook Pro line is going to get refreshed with Haswell chips, and obviously we know the Mac Pro is coming. But like you say, it's all quiet on the Western Front. Mavericks is coming. It keeps coming and it keeps coming, but we don't know when. iOS, obviously, like Peter said, we get a good feeling as to when it's actually going to be with us. But I remember Mountain Lion it almost just slipped out last year. It kind of took me by surprise. I was out. I think I was away somewhere, and how am I going to get all of this all of a sudden? But I mean, it's not inconceivable that they could tag on a Mac hardware announcement to the September 10th event or soon after if we're in a product window. We've not heard anything, so I mean, it would be a surprise either way. But I think it'd be a great one. The one more thing. Here's some shiny new MacBook Pros. Mavericks is pushing out tomorrow.
If past is prologue, we'll probably see an announcement in October. I don't think that Apple really wants to overshadow whatever it's going to do on September 10th with Mac news. We have a good suspicion of what's coming. You know, it stands to reason that the MacBook Pros are going to be updated with Haswell microprocessors, and that Haswell will probably also make its way into the Mac Mini. And possibly even the iMac, although there's not really a lot of compelling reasons for the iMac to get Haswell specifically. But you know, it's always, you know, kind of treacherous waters to sort of look back at what Apple's done in the past and infer what it's going to do in the future. But October would be a safe bet for some kind of new Mac release, I suspect.
And of course, we're going to cover the hell out of that. We're going to be the absolute best place for you to get all your information leading up to the event. And we're also doing a contest, our countdown to iPhone 5S contest. But it's really more of a countdown to September 10th contest, because what we're doing is every week you can enter for a chance to win a $500 gift certificate to put towards, we say an iPhone 5S, but of course you could do an iPhone 5C, you could do a Mac. Anything that you want to put it towards, you are more than welcome to do that. And every weekday on the site, we have a new way for you to enter. Sometimes it's on Twitter, sometimes Facebook, sometimes Google+, sometimes YouTube. For example, if you're watching this show and you go to youtube.com/iMore video, there's a video that you can add a comment to for your chance to enter. So as we approach September, as we approach a theoretical event in October, Apple's got these 4 product lines, the iPhone, the iPod, the Mac, and the iPad. There's probably going to be an hour's worth of content for each. Last year it was iPhone and iPod, and then iPad and Mac. Could be the same this year, could be different, but we're going to make sure that we get you all the news, and we also want to give you that chance to win. So just go to imore.com/iPhone-5S-contest and make sure you enter, because we're going to give away like $2,000, and that's $2,000 Yankee dollars, Richard. I don't know what that translates into in British pounds, probably 1.3 quid, but it's nothing to sneeze
much less. Much less at the moment.
So, also in the news this week, and I never know how to look at this. I was talking to you and Peter about this earlier, is that there's this ongoing theme of Apple is doomed that we have to go through, it seems, on a weekly, bi-weekly, whatever monthly basis. And there was an article written about Tim Cook that had some interesting pieces, you know, comments from Bob Iger of Disney about how getting rid of Scott Forstall and going with Johnny Ive was a very personal decision for Tim Cook. That's something that he reflected on a lot, but he made the decision on. And other things about working for Tim Cook as opposed to Steve Jobs in general. But Peter, the narrative always seems to go back to Apple is doomed. The stock is down 5%. It's not down 5%. It's down 5% from its high, but it's way up compared to when Tim Cook took over as CEO. And it's interesting to me that we can have good content in an article, but not necessarily competent, and that's probably not fair, but not necessarily, well, I'm going to say it, Bush League journalism bringing it all together.
Well, you know, I think that unfortunately mainstream media publications are under the same pressure that a lot of online publications are, and that is to try to get as many page views as possible for their stories. And that leads a lot of reporters down this rabbit hole of trying to come up with a sensationalistic headline and a sensationalistic lead in order to get people to read their stuff. You know, the Apple is doomed stuff is no different. They know that anything that you say that's controversial about Apple, either positive or negative, is going to engender a lot of traffic. You know, people who are Apple enthusiasts are going to come out and read it and comment on the story. People who are Apple haters are going to come out and read it because it confirms it's confirmation bias for them if it's negative. So either way, it's a win-win as long as people are seeing it. You know, the old adage in journalism is if it bleeds, it leads. And it seems like if it bleeds apple juice, it leads these days.
See, I was ascribing it to the same thing as you, to pandering, because in a certain way we tell people what we want to read, and I've said this before, but you know, you get the Nielsen surveys and you fill it out by hand, everyone will say PBS over TMZ, but when they measure on a digital box, everyone's watching TMZ and no one's watching PBS. So in a certain way we get the journalism that we tell them that we want, and we're responsible for the crappy stuff that we often get. But at the same time, I think that there's an element, and Richard, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think there's an element of laziness where there can be good information, but the person reporting it is either not doing their job by looking into it deeply and trying to figure out what the actual story is, but sort of accepting a common mainstream quote-unquote wisdom that may not be accurate. They're sort of perpetuating something instead of actually reporting it.
Yeah, things are often not any way what they seem, but it almost feels like in the light of any specific kind of positive news. So we know we've got new hardware and new software on the way, but in the light of nothing kind of specific that mainstream media can actually report on, it just seems like sometimes there's a bit of kind of scrabbling around, and anything that can be taken in any kind of context can be blown out of all proportion. I mean, Steve Jobs was Steve Jobs. Unfortunately, he's passed away. He isn't coming back, but he was this kind of celebrity figure. He was a showman, and I often think that people are down on Tim Cook because he's not the showman. He's obviously a perfectly good businessman, and he obviously knows what he's doing, but he's not. He doesn't come out in the black polo neck and the trainers and the jeans and do the Steve Jobs on stage. And I sometimes feel that people kind of they're too down on him for not being that kind of flamboyant showman that Jobs was in public.
I mean, that's a good point, and it's as much as Steve, you can't say that Steve didn't contribute to Apple. What I want to say is people who say that losing Steve Jobs didn't affect Apple is sort of equivalent to saying that Steve Jobs being in Apple was of no benefit, and I think nobody in their right mind would ever say that. So obviously losing Steve Jobs is a huge loss, but in an alternate universe where Steve Jobs was healthy and fine, I think losing Tim Cook would also have been very bad for Apple because and there's this famous story about it, the guy at the Apple keynote looking over and saying, "My God, how did you make the iPad?" And they said, Steve. And they said, well, how did you make it only $500? And the same guy looks over and says, well, Tim. And as much as Steve Jobs drove this vision for product, Tim Cook feels like the guy that was best able to translate that vision into not only reality, but affordable reality, because the knock on Apple was always better but more expensive. And now, with a lot of the products, including the MacBook Air, it is better and, at least for the first couple of years, less expensive. I mean, not only less expensive, but unable to be produced by anybody else. And he did this better than Dell. He did this better than any other company that was already good at it. And, Peter, whether we're talking iOS devices or Macs, I think there's also a common misconception as to just how important Tim Cook is to Apple.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tim Cook has been important to Apple for a very long time, right? I mean, he is responsible for setting up the supply chain that's helped Apple make so much money. And, people forget about that. Sure, he may not be the charismatic showman that Steve Jobs was, but it's inarguable that he's got a much more quiet demeanor about him, much more thoughtful presentation, much less mercurial. Doesn't make for as good headlines, and certainly doesn't seem to attract the rhapsodic, obsession from the press as Jobs did. But is he doing a bad job running the company? No, not particularly. So I just don't understand a lot of the negative press that we see slung at Apple these days, and at Cook in particular. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
It was interesting because Steve Jobs was CEO and Tim Cook was COO, Chief Operations Officer, and then interim CEO when Steve Jobs started having health problems. But since Tim Cook has become CEO, there's been no new COO. Jeff Williams, who used to work under Cook when Cook was COO, is Senior Vice President of Operations, but he's not a COO. And I don't know all the subtle distinctions, but it seems to me, Tim Cook may not need a COO the same way Steve Jobs did. And to go back to that article, it starts off with a story about Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook, who's trying to learn how to be number two to Mark Zuckerberg, calling up Tim Cook for advice. And Tim Cook is saying, basically what I do at Apple is that there are always going to be things that Steve Jobs just doesn't want to do. He's not as interested in, or maybe he's not as good at, and it's my job to do those things that Steve is not spending his time to do. And those sort of things will change over time. And you've got to imagine imagine that Tim Cook as CEO is still doing the things that he's great at, which is logistics, supply chain, analyzing data. Steve Jobs seems to have gone a lot off gut. Like this was the color for the iPhone. This is a product we're going to make. Where Tim Cook talks to more people, gets more opinions, still makes absolute decisions, but looks at data in a way that's very different. Maybe he's more intellectual and Steve Jobs was more instinctual. Peter, does that make sense?
It absolutely does. The phrase that jumped out in the article that you're referring to, Rene, is data-driven decisions. It seems like Tim Cook is and always has been much more of a quant than Steve Jobs ever was. And whether you're running a company off intuition or off raw data, people can make the argument for or against either way. But bottom line is, it's a different management style.
It's a Mentat versus Bene Gesserit.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a good comparison.
So it's interesting to me that those roles, and I'm sure again, Johnny Ive is now handling design across software and hardware. Bob Mansfield, although not officially in the same capacity as Senior Vice President of Technology, is still there working on special projects. That was actually one of the funnier things that I saw take off on the gold iPhone bit, Richard, was that it was Apple doing a test for a gold iWatch.
Yeah, I mean, special projects is... It's almost licensed for the internet to go mental and speculate as to anything. I wouldn't see that at all, to be honest. But
there was soft confirmation, and his name escapes me right now. I had it in my head a second ago, but the guy who used to work at Nike on the Fuel Band, the fitness consultant, who it was rumored 9 to 5 Mac put a lot of pieces together and said that he was going to Apple, and now it looks absolutely confirmed that he is at Apple, also working on special projects. And again, Peter, I don't know if it's we have heard that an iWatch is coming, and it makes a lot of sense to have biometrics in an iWatch. But as part of Apple's portfolio in general, lifestyle products and even the further dissemination and democratization of technology, it seems like those sort of health indicators would be a leading edge no matter what you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's a lot more to it than just people who are trying to live a healthy lifestyle with a Fitbit or a Fuel Band or one of a number of other products that are designed to sort of tie in biometrics to your daily life and your online life in particular. People like me who are diabetic, obviously need to keep track of their blood sugar numbers and their blood pressure and other stuff like that. This is a place where electronic devices can have huge assistive benefits. I'd certainly rather wear something on my wrist, for example, than have to prick my finger 3 or 4 times a day like I do now. Bleed all over the place, have to staunch the bleeding, all this other stuff, and then, of course, have to have the discomfort of the puncture wound. If this is something that technology can help me with, then I'm all for it. Where I run into trouble with the iWatch is it just repeating something that I've already seen before? I don't particularly care to wear something on my wrist that's just giving me data from my iOS device, because my iOS device is nearby. I don't need to see yet another device where people are going to be able to iMessage me or where calendar reminders are going to pop up or what have you. That really isn't that useful to me. It's definitely the biometric end of this stuff where I think that there are some possibilities, and it'll be interesting to see what else that Apple and Jay Blanek, I think his name is,
yes,
can bring to the table here with a device that you might wear on your watch or anywhere else on your body for that matter. I mean, what's really stopping Apple from doing like an eye pendant or an eye monocle or an eye codpiece or something? I don't understand why we're
right on your teeth.
Exactly. I don't understand why we're so hung up on the watch idea. Watches just seem so 20th century to me.
Well, here's a couple things, and I think absolutely the biometrics makes a lot of sense. The sensors make a lot of sense, and there's an entire health and lifestyle angle for Apple to attack. But Richard, an Android Central editor-in-chief who shall remain nameless, finally got his Pebble off of Kickstarter. Mine arrived a little while ago. It took like 16 months. It's crazy. But he got his, and he was remarking about how nicely it works with Android, just because the notifications come to your wrist. If you're in a conversation with somebody, if you're in an appointment with somebody, even if you're driving and you can't, safely look at your phone and an important notification comes up, it's right there on your wrist and visible. And you can extrapolate that to the future where you have something like Google Now or Siri, which are card-based natural language interfaces, and if traffic conditions change, it could update on your watch, so you don't have, even if you're not looking at your phone, or if appointments change or something, these prescient assistant technologies could be used as much as the biometrics, so you have sort of two great areas of compelling product to go to.
Yeah, I don't think we're necessarily the kind of best target audience for these sort of things, because we've usually got a phone close by, we're in front of a computer. So even simple things like telling the time, we've always got something to hand. I haven't worn a watch in, I can't remember how many years. But at the same time, in my previous employment, I did a lot of traveling, was out on a lot of different sites and things like that. And something that I could wear on my wrist in that environment would have been ideal for me, so that I wasn't forever having to fish in my pocket to pull out my BlackBerry, to check my emails, to check the time, check my route plans, my appointments. Being able to have, in that environment, being able to have all that at my wrist and leave my phone in my pocket would have been brilliant. It would have been fantastic, really, really convenient for me. It's interesting you mentioned the Pebble as well. I mean, I've just received my email. I missed the Kickstarter. I pre-ordered one in January when the general pre-orders opened, and I've just literally got an email saying I can now buy one if I still want it. And I really don't know whether it's for me or not anymore. I may be buying it just because it's a new piece of technology, but yeah, because we like to have these things. But I mean, there's also the rumors that Samsung are going to get in on this as well, and everybody is supposedly competing with the iWatch that doesn't yet exist. So everybody's supposed to be trying to beat Apple to market with a product that nobody knows anything about. But I think we're going to end up with a lot of different versions of the same thing. So if Apple does come into this space and they can bring something different like the biometrics, or they can combine 2 or 3 different products into one, then that could be a differentiator. But at the minute, we could just be looking at a lot of different smartwatches that will tell you your emails.
You just made me flash back to when the rumors of the iPad started out, and Steve Ballmer raced onto the CES stage to hold up the Windows slate before Apple announced anything. And it reminded me of those internet comments, first!
It's true, though. I mean, everybody's... Okay, it could well exist, and the iWatch could well exist in the not too distant future. But I don't understand how everybody's supposedly trying to beat Apple to market when Apple isn't coming to market yet.
Well, that's an interesting point, Richard. And if it's okay with you, Rene, I'd like to kind of expand on that for a moment, because we were talking about the management differences between Steve Jobs and sort of the conceptual differences between Steve Jobs and Tim Cook. And one of the things that I think all of us have noticed over the course of the past couple of years is that Apple's secrecy is still a thing, but it's not the thing. It doesn't seem to be as overriding an issue as it was anymore. We've seen a lot more, I don't want to call them leaks, but a lot more broadcasting, I guess, far in advance of what Apple is going to do than we've ever seen before. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I mean, like the things like the Mac Pro, right? So you get they preview a new product that's not going to launch for months, which is not a common thing for Apple. I think that I think they absolutely did double down on the kind of secrecy Tim Cook mentioned, because he believes that people want to be surprised still, so they don't want product leaks going out. But I think what you're referring to, and what I've seen a lot too, is almost like, and I don't know if openness is the right word, but they've been much more forthright and forthcoming. Just as a company in general, whether it's apologizing for maps or whether it's the continued initiatives that they're doing with labor relations in China, or whether it's bringing Macs back to the USA. The big knock on Apple is that they had fantastic marketing but very, very poor crisis management PR. They would never, ever, not ever get ahead of something. They would always wait till it became as bad as possible before trying to fix it. And it seems like under Tim Cook, at least, there's a willingness to engage sooner and maybe mitigate some of the things that their traditional silence exacerbated rather than enhanced.
It's arguable, and I hate to use the phrase that we've seen beaten into the ground. It never would have happened under Steve Jobs, but one can argue if this gold iPhone thing pans out, that is something that probably never would have happened under Steve Jobs.
So you say that, but I look at the Flower Power and Blue Dalmatian iMac, Peter.
No, not the release of the gold iPhone itself, but I'm talking about the leak of the gold iPhone.
Left in a bar.
Right, exactly. That was the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah, I mean, the dichotomy is so interesting. And the other thing that was interesting this week is there was an article about Amazon, because people tend to think that Apple is secretive and controlling, and they absolutely are, but everything is relative. Apple is more secret and more controlling than some other companies, but Amazon, who enjoys a huge level of customer satisfaction and investor confidence, anyone who's dealt with them as a publisher in the past knows that they obliterate Apple when it comes to being draconian. We've talked to developers who do, Amazon has an Android app store, and they make Apple look like a hippie when it comes to app store management. They will change your ad copy, they will change your price, they will give you your app away for free. They basically own you if you come onto their platform, which is far beyond what Apple does, but also their secrecy level. I mean, you see, and Peter and Richard, we all see this. We see, Apple, even if it's a boilerplate comment, Apple once in a while buys companies, generally does not discuss what they're doing with them. The comment, there was a piece in this Amazon article saying that Amazon almost never provides a comment to the press, and an Amazon representative declined to comment on this piece. Like one after the other. So I think Apple operates maybe within a range of openness, and we're seeing Tim Cook go towards the more extreme of that range.
Yeah, no, exactly. This is true. So it'll be interesting to see how this evolves, because I do think it's an evolving situation. I think Tim Cook's absolutely right. The customers like to be surprised with new products, but I also think that Apple recognizes that especially as its supply chain has grown in complexity, expecting everybody to keep their mouths shut all the time is just an untenable situation. Yeah. It isn't like the old days where a supplier might, old-time Mac users will remember the time that ATI, AMD acquired ATI, the graphics chip maker, spilled the beans on the fact that it was going to be in a new group of Macs that were being released or introduced at Macworld Expo in New York. And Steve Jobs infamously went around to the machines, the demo machines beforehand, and made sure that there was no evidence of ATI visible whatsoever, and made sure not to mention ATI at all, just out of spite at having had his hand tipped. We're not seeing that sort of stuff happen anymore. I don't see, people in suppliers in China being let out to the firing squad for letting the cat out of the bag about new stuff coming from Apple.
Yeah, and I think that's a reflection of the new reality, because Macs were always, they were profitable, but they were always a very small market segment, where Apple, again, they're going to make 50 million iPhone 5Ss, maybe 100 million iPhone 5Ss. There's very few places in the world that can handle that kind of manufacturing. And if it is such a commodity, like accessory makers are right next door, they're saying, we want to get our cases ready on time. There's, thousands of employees. If even one of them helps them with information, they'll be richly rewarded. And it is probably impossible for Apple to lock down the supply chain, given the numbers that they're dealing with and the incentives being offered by those with a vested interest in finding out this information.
Right, exactly.
Now, the other thing that's interesting to me, Richard, is this iPhone 5C idea, and this is the lower-range iPhone. Apple has never gone into more than one new iPhone a year, but it looks like they might be doing that soon. And we've spoken about the reasons before. The new all the nerds already have smartphones. The people who are buying now are much more price-sensitive than they were in the past. There's emerging markets and an increase in people who don't want to buy a phone on contract, and off-contract iPhones are still very expensive. And also, as previous year's iPhones are more expensive and better quality, just shifting them down makes it harder to sell the new great iPhone, because the old ones are still really good quality. So you have all these pressures that would lead Apple to make an iPhone 5C. And Apple traditionally goes for colors on the lower end. You know, the iPod Nano was nanochromatic. Android has a lot of lower-end devices, and the rumor going around now is that in some markets it might be 3G only, because there's a lot of markets without LTE, but the bottom line will be a more price-conscious iPhone. And I wonder, because you had a lot of experience with lower-end BlackBerries and Androids, how you could see an Apple phone in that light.
Ultimately, it all comes down to how low they could get the price in the first place, but you look at some of the prices of some of the quote-unquote lower spec Android phones, and if Apple could even get within $100 of that, you've got the iPhone brand that goes with it. It carries some weight of prestige wherever it goes. You see the brand, you don't associate it with these really crappy little tiny awful smartphones that you get from some of the competing manufacturers. The lack of LTE thing, in the UK, it wouldn't necessarily be too much of an issue because we don't really have LTE yet. Until the end of this month, we've got one carrier, and even the iPhone 5 will only work on that carrier at the moment. But places like China, we keep hearing these stories about Apple and China Mobile partnering up to get the iPhone out on their network. They're the world's largest cellular provider, but they have a really old network infrastructure. LTE is not really much of a thing. At the minute, they're 3G only, but they have a massive amount of customers that are buying cheaper phones. So if Apple could, in a market like that, okay, it's only one market, but China's got an awful lot of people, and even if they could only sell the 5C there in big numbers, they would still post. They could still post some really, really big numbers for it.
I think it's really interesting, and Peter, Apple, we've talked about this at length. Apple famously didn't do netbooks. They did the MacBook Air and they did the iPad. When they went to the iPod Mini, when they went to the iPad Mini, when they went to the Mac Mini, they never sacrificed quality. What they did is remove features that were not essential to the market that they wanted to address, or to the market they wanted to increase their addressable space in. And it strikes me that the iPhone 5C, at least from what we've seen so far, is almost exactly that model yet again for the phone.
Yep, absolutely. It remains, like you said, it remains to be seen what exactly this thing is going to have. But my guess is that we're going to see some subset of features that the full-featured iPhone is going to have. But the interesting thing about what Apple does is that it doesn't dramatically differentiate or reduce the user experience going from one product to another. There may be some internal changes that affect your ability to do some things, but like in the case of the iPad Mini versus the full-sized iPad, you're talking about a differentiation of graphics resolution on the display and performance. It's got the same amount of storage capacity. It has the same kind of connector on it. It is the same, and it's running the exact same software as its larger cousin. So how Apple is going to differentiate a 5C from a 5S, say, is a very interesting question, and it'll be interesting to see what they do.
And what I also find interesting, Richard, is the colors. Phil Nickinson did this review, or he's working on the review for the Moto X, and one of the parts he's put up so far is Moto Maker, where if you are in the U.S. and you are on AT&T, you can go in and on a website choose all sorts of different finishes, up to and including, although not available yet, a wood veneer casing on the back of the phone. And it's laughable in some ways because Dell tried this with laptops, and other case makers have tried this, and it's never been a huge success. And it's not something Apple could do because when you're making 50 million units, you just can't handle multiple colors like that in supply chain. But it's interesting for me to see that kind of differentiation, or that kind of a strategy being employed.
At this point, there's so many different black and white boxes that even just throwing a lick of paint on the back of the phone can differentiate it from everything else in the market, hardware specs aside, software aside. The Moto X is a prime example. I don't really know too much about the actual sort of internals of the phone, but I mean, we're not getting it over here, so I can't buy one. So I haven't really looked too hard into it. But from what I understand, it's not like the latest, greatest, bleeding edge hardware, but the fact that you can go and buy one with a wood veneer back, why you would want to do that, I honestly don't know. But it's, for some people, it's great. I mean, it's the choice that they want. It's a unique, it's a unique phone to them, and it's kind of like I was saying earlier with the gold. I've had, every phone I've had has been black or white, so the gold would be a nice change just to have something different. But it's surprising how much people take into account the color of things. And I mean, HTC made a red HTC One. I think it looks awesome just because it's red. It's different and it stands out. And if the 5C's got some different colored backs to it, it's not just black and it's not just white. When it's sat in the stores alongside competing products, it's going to jump out straight away.
And that's, I think you both raised really good points. I mean, internally, my guess, and it's a complete guess at this point, is that the iPhone 5C will be similar internally to what the iPhone 5 is, an A6 processor. It'll probably have similar storage options. It'll have the plastic colored back. I'm not sure what the camera will be. Maybe the iPhone 5 camera is even cheap enough for it to go into here unmodified. But one of the differentiators could be, and we're hearing more about, is the fingerprint scanner. I heard very little about it, but Mark Gurman got a bunch of details during the week that it's now actually in the latest prototype hardware being tested in the device. I heard previously it wasn't a swipe, and he corroborates that. He says that it's more of a, you touch the sensor, you touch the home button, and it does that. And we've talked about this before, Peter. Something that is a passcode, something that you have is a token, something that you are is biometrics. But I wonder about implementation at this point, and the need to take things slowly. And there's a couple things I'd like your opinion on. One is, I can't imagine that Apple could be incredibly robust in terms of the detection. Like if they start sampling a ton of points, it makes me think that there might be a lot of errors involved. And the last thing anybody wants is to be locked out of their phone because they'll just stop using it. So it seems to me like that maybe they'll start less aggressively with that. You'll be able to use a passcode or the fingerprint scanner, passcode and the fingerprint scanner, or neither. But the interesting thing to me is not just how it starts, but maybe in the future if we see it start going into something like Safari's iCloud keychain, for example.
Indeed. iCloud keychain is a big deal because it's coming in iOS 7 and it's coming in Mavericks. It's going to be the future of how Apple manages security, at least on the web, for its users. And it's cool technology because it takes a lot of the mechanics of having to remember passwords out of your hands, and it puts it in the cloud. People are understandably perhaps a little concerned about the potential security aspects of that. What if somebody hacks my iCloud account? Apple's careful to say, look, we use encryption. It's nothing really to worry about. But as we all know, anything that's out there can eventually be found by somebody if they look hard enough and if they try hard enough to actually see it. I'm really curious to see how if or how Apple will implement any kind of biometric security system, because it seems like the ones that we've seen up until now are fallible in some way. They can either be faked out or they can be avoided or whatever. That isn't really Apple style, so this is sort of unknown territory for them. Although I do remember a number of years ago, Steve Jobs demonstrating voice print locking on iOS. My voice is my password was what he said at a keynote. That really never went anywhere, so I'm curious to see what this is going to do.
What's interesting to me too is I like the idea of iCloud keychain, but right now, and I don't know the details yet. I've only known what Apple has disclosed publicly. I would never use it just because I don't want to unlock my phone or my computer to also unlock my passwords. I like the idea that 1Password or LastPass does, where you have a master password in addition to your login. So I can, for example, put in a PIN code, give my phone to Richard, and not have to worry that he'll immediately go to Safari and log into all my bank sites and or go to Amazon and start buying stuff. I like the discreteness of that. And I like the idea that in order for Safari iCloud keychain to work, my finger has to be on that home button authenticating me, not just when I open the phone, but when I want to make a payment or log in at any time.
I'm with you on the on the taking it slowly part to start with, and again, I'm not sure I would trust all my passwords for everything to Apple or to Google or to anybody like that. I use MSecure myself, but I'm that kind of person. I wouldn't stray away from that. What I would like to see with the fingerprint scanner in particular is, okay, take it slowly to start with, make sure it absolutely works and it works flawlessly, because they can't afford, if it is a real, if it's coming on the next iPhone, they can't afford to market the hell out of it and it not work flawlessly.
Like Siri or Maps.
Yeah, they don't want to be issuing another apology. Sorry, people have been locked out of their phones because the fingerprint scanner doesn't work properly. But I was thinking last night as I was typing in my ridiculously long Apple ID password that you have to type in every time you download even a free app from the App Store.
It's horrible. It
would be brilliant if I could just put my thumb on the fingerprint scanner, it'll scan that, it knows it's me, and I don't have to enter a bazillion character password every time I want to buy something. I can just touch the button. So if you think outside the box, I think there could be a really good future in it, but it does need to be baby steps, I think, to start with.
And Peter, like, you have a family, right? So the other concern with the thumbprint scanner is whether it'll be one person or multiple persons, because if your device is locked with a thumb scanner, how is your kid supposed to use it? How is your spouse supposed to use it? We don't want to have everyone donate a thumb to the family thumb tree that everyone carries around with them to get into their devices.
Yeah, you end up with something that looks like scalps hanging off of a necklace. I don't know. On one hand, yeah, I understand that could be an issue. On the other hand, this doesn't need to be a solution that fits everyone. There are going to be exceptions to every rule, and maybe thumbprint scanning would be one area, because iOS famously doesn't really handle multiple user accounts very effectively. You really it's a system that's set up for one user per device. But this is a very real situation where parents have iPads that they're handing off to their kids that they're using as a reward system, for example, especially for younger kids. Works very effectively. I'm also a little bit worried about what it might mean for other systems going forward. Is this going to be the future of password security for everything? Are we going to see thumb scanners built into future versions of the Magic Trackpad, or
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, or the Magic Mouse or whatever? I don't know. It's a slippery slope. I'm really kind of two minds about it.
So once again, we should be seeing more of this develop, and then hopefully we'll be seeing all of it in real life on September 10th at the next iPhone event, which Apple has not announced. So not only has the event not been announced, but the products have not been announced nor displayed. So this is all speculation at this point. But I think it's important stuff, and it's worth talking about. I also think it's important to find out what games Peter is using and recommending this week, or Mac apps in general, Peter.
Well, Race the Sun is my new jam. It's really cool. And Richard, if you haven't tried it yet, I strongly recommend that you check it out, knowing your affinity for racing games.
I'll take a look.
Race the Sun is a cool game from a company called Flipify, and this was actually funded through a Kickstarter program. They're trying to get on Steam's Greenlight as well, program as well, but you can download it directly from the manufacturer or the developer for $10 from their website. It is an endless racer, and the way that it works is that you are flying this solar craft, this craft that's powered by the rays of the sun, and you are essentially chasing the sun. And the end of the game is when the sun sets. But in the interim, you're trying to fly around all these objects like mountains and through trenches, kind of like Star Wars and all this other stuff. And you're trying to stay in the sun while picking up power-ups and avoiding enemies and stuff like that. It's beautifully done, but some of the really cool features about it that really make it worth checking out. First of all, it runs on Mac, PC, or Linux, so regardless of what your platform is, ostensibly, most of you watching me right now are on Macs, but, there's no accounting for taste. What can I tell you?
Ouch.
But you can also there's also a built-in world editor, so you can create your own levels. It's the built-in system is procedurally generated, so it's different every time you play. And there's also co-op multiplayer built in that works kind of like an asynchronous relay race, which is really kind of cool. Definitely worth checking out. We've got some information on it on our website.
So Richard, what about you?
Well, I'm still playing Shadowgun Dead Zone on the Mac because it's awesome. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go for it. Multiplayer shoot 'em up. It's free. It's just awesome. There's no reason not to check it out for free download. But I have just this morning downloaded Asphalt 8, which I'll be getting stuck into and looking forward to very much. Simon Sage posted a review last week of a pre-release copy. It's now in the App Store for 99 cents in America. I think it's stacked up with in-app purchases, but it looks amazing. So I'm prepared to give it a chance first.
Yeah, so the in-app purchase thing is interesting because EA, a lot of people gave EA a lot of well-deserved grief for Real Racing 3, but Plants vs. Zombies, which also got EA-fied and freemiumized, so far is not getting as much negative pushback as Real Racing did. And I'm hoping that, Peter, maybe that's the trend, that they'll figure out how to make less onerous, odoriferous premium and premium games.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've had conversations with developers over the past few days about freemium, and it's interesting to note that when developers have done what I think the three of us would consider the right thing is to do, which is to just make or offer a game for a fair price, people stay away from it in droves. Whether that fair price is $5 or $10 or 99 cents, people stay away from it in droves. People at this point in the App Store are conditioned to download free stuff. Mm-hmm. And when they download free stuff, if it's got in-app purchases, they will, on the whole, spend more than they will for paying for something outright. So it comes back to what you were talking about before, Rene, which is, people will tell you that they watch PBS, but when you actually look at their viewing habits, they watch TMZ instead. People will tell you that they want to pay a fair price for something, but the fact is they respond much better to freemium. As long as that's the case, then I think that we're going to see this trend continue. And I'm happy to see, at least in PopCap and EA's case with PV2, with Plants vs. Zombies 2, they've certainly got the matrix down a little bit better than they did with Fire Monkey's release of Real Racing 3, which I think was very heavily weighted towards spending a lot of money. The one thing that I wish Apple and developers could figure out a way of implementing is some sort of cap where they say, all right, if you spend X dollars on this game, that's it. We're going to remove IAP. We're going to make it fully
a buy everything button.
Right, a buy everything button, exactly. If there was a buy everything button or a limit that you could hit where, okay, you've spent enough, we're not going to take any more of your money, I think the system would be a lot more fair than it is now. And I also think we'd avoid getting any more headlines about, parents being charged $1,000 for Smurf berries.
I smell an editorial, Peter.
There we go, yeah.
Also, in the last couple of weeks, Ali and now Peter have been doing their back-to-school roundups. The best apps to get if you are a teacher, parent, or student about to go back to elementary school, high school, or college. You can check that out at imore.com/apps. Peter and Ali have also been breaking down great writing apps. Ali's doing journaling apps, text editors. Peter's got the best Mac text editors up there. Richard's broken down the best Mac racing games. This week I looked at Hype 2 for the Mac, which is basically if you've ever done Flash animation and interactivity and hated Adobe's interface and runtime as much as I did, you can go to Hype, and Hype is a beautiful Mac app. It will produce beautiful HTML5 code, no nasty plugins required. It's got a companion Hype Reflect app that lets you preview and try out your interactive animations on iOS as well. A bunch of new touch events, drag events, all of that. Fantastic for anyone who wants to make a better looking, more interactive website and doesn't want to be locked into Flash. And just last night, Clayton Morris's Read Quick app, which is previously iPad only, hit the App Store for iPhone. And whether you just want to get better at reading in general or you want to get faster at reading because God knows the amount of content being produced is not slowing down, you can now not only have Read Quick on your iPad, but have it on your iPhone as well, and we'll have that going up shortly. And again, all of that can be found at imore.com/apps. And the last thing I want to do is, once again, we produce a ton of both internet radio and internet video at iMore and at Mobile Nations. For the last 2 weeks, Peter and Richard and I have been doing a daily iMore Today update. We're just kind of experimenting with it. We're trying it out. We want to bring you everything you need to know about the news in 5 minutes, the beginning of every day. I don't know whether we're going to continue it or change it or what, but for now we're testing it out. So if you haven't already, go to youtube.com/iMore video and let me know what you think. If you're enjoying it, if you want to see something different, if you'd rather we stick to just the one show a week, let me know. We've also got our regular podcasts ongoing. This week on Debug, we spoke to the one and only Will Shipley in a 2-hour extravaganza. We went through the beginnings of Next, his early interactions with Apple as they were building out OS X, all the way up to his work on Delicious Library and what happens next, including when he was at Omni Group and had to deal with the Air Force for a lot of their super secret purchases of early PDF and web technology. On Vector, I spoke to Ben Baharan about the differences between Amazon, Apple, Google, and Samsung, not just in terms of business model, but philosophy, and how poorly perhaps we really understand the different markets that Amazon, Apple, Samsung, and Google are addressing, and that, you know, basically Apple's competing with the whole country of Korea. These people are building oil rigs. It is not a fair fight. That I thought was really interesting. On Iterate coming up, we have the makers of DJ, a fantastic music app for iPhone and iPad. We also have another Zen and Tech coming your way on Monday or Tuesday. And, of course, the Android Central podcast, Crackberry podcast, Windows Phone Central podcast. Peter, I don't know how I'm supposed to watch all this stuff, much less produce it.
Yeah, well, that's the $50,000 question, Rene. I don't understand how you can produce all this stuff either. It amazes me every day.
We recorded a 3-hour debug yesterday. No spoilers, but it was if you like the Don Melton episode and you like the David Gelfman episode, you will love this episode. It's probably going to be 2 episodes, though. Richard, we don't have a racing show yet, but we can certainly put it on the discussion list.
I wouldn't really want to add too much to your already extensive podcasting workload.
All right, guys. Peter, where can people find out more about you?
iMore.com, loopinsight.com, and on Twitter or app.net at Flarg, Flargh.
And you are a witty yet acerbic read, especially when you're going after things like the gold iPhone.
The gold iPhone, I just don't understand.
It's got you all shook up.
It does.
And Richard, where can people find you?
You can find me, of course, every day on iMore.com and occasionally elsewhere on Mobile Nation sites. I'm on the Twitters at Ricka666, and I'm usually more on Google+, where I think you just search for my name.
Yeah, no vanity Phil Nicholson URL for any of us.
Definitely not.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find me on imore.com and at mobilenations.com. You can find all of us at iMore, and you can find all of our shows at Mobile Nations. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will be back. Have an excellent week. Chat room, thank you. You are as lovely and cordial as ever. Have a great week, guys.
Bye.
Bye.